Gautham Menon's Vendhu Thanindhathu Kaadu is one of my favorite movies of the year. It's essentially a gangster film and contains many tropes from other gangster movies that we are familiar with, but it is also unique in its own way. The film isn't plot driven but character driven, so to speak, as the structure of the film is us linearly following the rise of our main character Muthu from that of poverty to his prominence in the underworld. And that too is something we have seen in other movies, but this film is a part one of a duology and it focuses less on the glamorous side of those in power and more on the men who serve those powerful people. Initially, Muthu's life is uninteresting. He does not have a job and there's no real purpose to his life. To show this mundanity, Gotham chooses to keep his shot still and stationary. But when he makes the active choice to go to Bombay, which is his first real decision that pushes the narrative forward, that's when the camera really starts to move and takes a life of its own as it searches for Muthu in the train. And right before that is when the director's title credit is shown, signifying the importance of this decision because Muthu cannot go back to how his life was after this. This is when the protagonist steps out of their comfort zone. Him taking control of his life and making decisions is excellently communicated with the cinematography. And the entire film is about Muthu's journey. We see him as a passive, shy, and naive boy who's just trying to fit in Bombay. He's new to his community and he's trying to find his place in the world. This is beautifully reflected even in the costume design. Muthu initially wears his new clothes he bought on the first day of his new job, and it's bright red. He stands out from the rest of the men, visually showing how he's alien to this place and sticks out like a sore thumb. But as the story progresses and Muthu begins to fit in and realize that he isn't just working in an average parota shop, but is a part of a larger gang war, his wardrobe also changes. Initially, he is reluctant, but it's the circumstances he's put in where he is forced to take action. The choices he makes then are ones he cannot take back. He is forced to fully dedicate himself to the gangster life, and as this gradual change happens, to show the internal change within Muthu, he goes from wearing bright clothes to darker ones to signify his turn to a more grittier and violent life. And this is not new but effective, as we have seen this in many other films that show characters turn to the dark side. But later in the end, when he breaks free from his life, you see that he goes back to wearing red. Now, granted, it's not a bright red shirt like he wore earlier, but maybe it shows that his lifestyle has had everlasting effects on Muthu, and so it's a darker shade of red. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it's never not fun to theorize. I think the primary theme of the film is about fate and destiny. Earlier in the film, Muthu's mother states that an astrologer predicted that he will become a killer. And that, amongst many other reasons, is what forces her to get Muthu out of the village and get a job. But this choice is what eventually lands in Muthu becoming a murderer, showing that eventually Muthu's destiny was for him to one day kill people.
It's the mother's drive to push this boy away from
Right.
wherever he is,
Right.
without knowing that she's actually sending him into,
Right.
hell.
But this film isn't much like the other films that explore this very similar theme. Unlike in other movies, Muthu never tries to escape his fate, but he also never tries to fulfill it. He's a passive protagonist, which is a very difficult line to walk when you want his story to be engaging. But this theme is intrinsically tied to a gun and the significance it holds in this story. When Muthu sees a gun for the first time, his first instinct is to take it with him. There's a pile of money next to the gun that could have solved all of his problems, but he chooses to take the gun instead. This choice, along with his decision to go to Bombay, are key moments in the story because they not only define his character more, but also are vital scenes that introduce the themes of the film. This gun plays a huge role in the film. You could even almost call it a character. Muthu first hides the gun when the cops enter the shop, and he's even once told that the gun could essentially change his entire life. But Muthu is sort of pushed around by fate in this movie because he's initially passive. He does eventually pull out the gun and use it, but only because he is forced to, as he was in a situation that required him to use the weapon in order to survive. And by this point, it's too late to go back. The gun doesn't leave him, it chose Muthu in a way, and he isn't forcefully tied to the gun either. He chooses to actively keep it with him at all times because he states that the mere presence of the weapon gives him respect. So this gun is used to emphasize and build on our protagonist's character and allows us to understand him even better. Now, Muthu's transformation is also reflected in the filmmaking of the action sequences. The approach of several scenes within the film is handheld long takes. which is, by this point, an overused filmmaking technique that risks feeling like a gimmick to show off technical skill rather than serving any form of narrative purpose. But here, it's not only a style, but it shows character. It's used to put us in Muthu's shoes as he sees where he's eventually going to live. But in terms of action, not only do we follow Muthu fighting, there is a sense of organized chaos because the people fighting are not trained combatants. So everything is messy and chaotic, and the gritty handheld filmmaking reflects that. But years later, when Muthu has adjusted to this lifestyle, he has more skill when fighting, and then the camera is less shaky and more organized and smooth to show that Muthu is the one in control when in a fight. And the camera really moves in this movie. It knows when to hold on a shot to register an emotion, but it also sometimes gains a life of its own as it tracks a movement or a character. But whether Muthu is working as a small henchman in the parota shop or as a high level bodyguard, he is still someone who is eventually disposable. Usually, many gangster films focus on the men in power. The hero and the villain are men in the higher ranks of their gang. But here, we get a look at the people who serve those in power and why they do so. Muthu is the main character of the movie, but he still has a long way up the hierarchy. He's nothing but a cog in the wheel who's been conditioned to follow rules blindly. Muthu never really does know why there are gangs fighting against each other. He just knows that he is expected to carry out orders successfully or else he will be killed. And that's another theme of the film. Survival. In this film, no one can trust each other. Friendships and bonds are severed at an instant when money comes at play. Any character might be willing to turn their back on someone they have known if it means for their survival. That's the motivation for all the characters in this movie, especially the henchmen of both rival gangs. In the song Mallipu, you see all the men in the shop dancing, and it's not only a moment of bonding for Muthu, but we really get to feel the yearning of all these men who are surviving for their families, and they share that collective moment through dance. And even in the filmmaking, along with it being one take, the people crowd the frame. There's barely any headroom, any space to breathe. Yet it doesn't feel overwhelming because everyone in the song is dancing with joy. It's a fantastic song and an even more fantastic scene. Rahman's music really lends to the tone of the film, putting us in the perspective of Muthu and making us feel what he feels. As Muthu rises throughout the story, the score also rises with him. Now, in the film, there is an important Malayali character, Sridharan, and the writing of his character is beautifully done. Sridharan and Muthu are essentially two sides of the same coin. Both of them come to Bombay in the same train, and they are adopted by different gangs, and this is when their differences start to show. Muthu is someone who does not like being disrespected, and especially with the gun, he feels like he will get more respect and always decides to keep it. Whereas Sridharan is someone who lets himself be used. He was and remains a passive character, whereas Muthu becomes a more active character progressively, and that's also why Muthu grows more powerful. In a scene where he almost gets killed, Muthu saves him despite Sridharan being from a different gang. It's because he sees himself in Sridharan, and this connection between the two lasts throughout the movie. There's even an undercurrent of Tamilians finding their place in Bombay, which is something that is also in Nayagan, a film that Gautham Menon is a huge fan of. And this undercurrent comes to the forefront in one scene where people from both communities fight inside a movie theater where Rajnikant's movie was playing. And I had also noticed a few similarities to the Godfather movies in this film. Muthu's hands never tremble when he uses a gun. Similarly, a small but important scene in the first Godfather movie is when Michael realizes that he's not at all scared by the intimidation of this gangster world when he notices his hands being completely still in a tense situation. Another callback is a line in Godfather Part 3 where Michael says,
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
and even the love portion of the film is mostly effective in my opinion. Muthu likes this girl called Pavai and they grow to like each other, and I love how their romance also plays a vital role in the overall story and how it is communicated through cinematography. There is a red versus blue theme going on in this movie. Muthu's wardrobe and surroundings are these harsh reds and yellows, and when he's with Pavai, he enters her world, which is blue, which is also reflected in their wardrobe and their surroundings. She grounds him in a way, bringing him to a different side of life. And later on, after their marriage, when she slowly begins entering his world, she's surrounded by red and yellow, which is also once again reflected in what she wears. In this scene where Pave talks to Muthu about consent and about not asking her for her marriage before he asked her parents, there is a divide between them between yellows and blues. And in the climax, he leaves this life and walks away from it, which was something new, at least in this genre, because usually in these films, the characters fall so deep into the hole of violence that they never usually end up making it alive. But here, he just walks away from it. But not completely, because in actuality, the film ends here, but there is an epilogue. After a time jump of 5 years, we see that Muthu not only went back to that life but is now a mob boss. And this works better as a precursor to part 2 rather than a part of the first film because it sort of undoes what the first part ended with. And I did not love the filmmaking of this epilogue very much. Everything felt rushed and a little out of place. But I will definitely say that I really, really cannot wait to see what happens in part 2 and what direction these characters are headed. So yeah, you can probably tell how much I loved this film because it gave me so much to talk about and analyze. Vendhu Thanindhathu Kaadu is a fantastic film where it explores themes of destiny and fate, but also survival, where the fantastic acting and filmmaking serve the story in such a way that it only enhances the experience of watching it. It is easily one of my favorite movies of the year, and you can now watch it on Amazon Prime Video. Let me know what you think about the movie in the comment section below. I would honestly love to discuss this movie with you guys. Thank you all for watching and supporting the channel, and have a wonderful day.